We think it's working.
We have nobody watching about it. We got to wait for all the guests to come in.
Well, we're this is the podcast too. So this is Mind Your Manners. I'm Zach Osterman. He's Mike Nislik. There's somebody watching.
Somebody
we
in
have
here.
a viewer. This is going to be a new format for our insider videos. Anyone who's seen them on our respective websites, we shoot those
on regular podcasts too, or do those live?
Well, I don't know if we'll see. We'll see where we get up to with that.
Right.
But basically, we'll do these live instead of just taping them and then uploading them. We will still upload them into all the content management so they can go to our stories. We'll also take the audio from these and release it as a podcast, just like we would any other Mind Your Banners. But the idea is to
they lost. We had two listeners. They're like, nope. All of them no.
The idea is basically to just kind of spread the media that this sort of touches out a little bit, and obviously to do this live post game after IU football and basketball games. We won't go long, probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes. We usually do about 10 minutes for the post game videos. So
but if readers have questions, we're happy to sit around and talk.
Well, we need viewers to get questions.
There's 3 people that have mistakenly clicked on our link. They're like, what is going on?
Let's talk about Indiana 52, Charlotte 14.
You need a fan or something.
I know. It's Scorchio. Scorchio. It's very warm, and we just got off the field. Indiana 52, Charlotte 14. Curt Cignetti, the first coach in Indiana history to start his tenure 4-0. It's funny because Cignetti seemed concerned in the build-up this week about maybe a bit of a letdown, a bit of complacency. I thought at times we saw that in this game. Yet Indiana still wins by 38. They still score 52 points. They rushed for 222 yards and 6 scores. They still haven't committed a turnover. Somebody asked Biff Poggi, Charlotte's head coach, about basically being the first team to score 2 touchdowns in one game against Indiana this season. He was like, I didn't know that. That was great to know. And the point is, that Indiana is playing this well and still feeling like it's letting itself down at times says something about the standard of expectation that this coach, this staff, and really this roster have embraced.
Well, I did think it was funny that Curt Cignetti said maybe he went a little overboard, that he didn't quite, he thought the team he was seeing things that weren't there, that the team did. That was like an interesting,
what did he say? Like, he said,
you can speak that into existence.
Yeah, like, here comes a letdown.
Yeah, and it didn't happen, obviously. But, I mean, look, I think they talked to a lot of the players and Kurt about, they haven't really faced much adversity. I mean, this game was 17-14, and then they scored 35 straight points and never looked back. They're facing a third-string quarterback. Charlotte was dealing with some injuries. They surprisingly ran the ball well, which I thought was the only, look, they'll pick apart the film and things, but really the only thing that didn't happen to Indiana's liking was that Charlotte ran the ball well in that first half after being one of the worst rushing offenses in the league through 3 games. But, I mean, the offense, you look at it, Charlotte was never going to compete because they could never be able to keep up, drive for drive with this team. Kurtis, Rourke, the numbers don't blow off the page, but they didn't need to throw a ton. 16-20, 258 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 passing. And then the rushing offense, over 200 yards again. You can go through the litany of stats. I mean, this team's just has just dominated the competition offensively. And, I don't know what else to say. They're just playing with a lot of confidence, playing sharp. Kurtis Rourke has obviously made the jump, and I think there's no question about he's been ready for this moment. This veteran savvy kind of comes in on display, multiple times a game. I don't think you could pick apart this team much from what we saw on Saturday. Just more of the same.
I think, I guess to start with maybe like the one negative, it is those 2 touchdown drives. It is that sense that for the first time, maybe all season, Indiana's defense suddenly kind of found a question it couldn't answer for a little while. Is it the heat? Is it any sense of complacency? I do think.
Well, I don't think you were there. I think you missed it. Sean Asbury said basically they were doing a lot of motions that they just hadn't seen before. So it took them a minute to sort of get.
I also thought something else that I think you've brought up is this staff talks so much about sort of like attacking vertically at the line of scrimmage defensively. And what that means is at times you might be susceptible to teams that block zonally and are happy to kind of let you come upfield and then just use your momentum against you and create lanes that way. I thought there was some of that from Charlotte too. But even again, like Indiana figures that out. I mean, Charlotte in the end rushes for 137 yards in this game.
82, I think, was in the first half.
So I mean, like they clearly adjusted. I'm looking at the numbers over here. 119 pass, 137 rush, 5 of 13 on third downs. I mean, I guess.
And they were 5 for 8 in the first half. They didn't convert a third down after the first half.
Okay, I didn't. So literally no third down conversions in the second half. I mean, it's sort of one of those where the competition is what it is, and we said before we looked at kind of this, because it felt like this block of 4 games was kind of its own thing in this season. You had the 3 non-conference games and then a test against the UCLA team that it felt as kind of the first 2 weeks went on, Indiana should probably beat, but it's on the road. It's it's UCLA's first Big Ten game. It's the Rose Bowl, all this. And it sort of felt like we were going to feel like we knew more about what to expect from this team after these first 4 games. And even given the competition, there's just nothing that you can really point to and say there's a reason why this might, sort of scupper Indiana in a meaningful way. Now, maybe it will against Ohio State. I don't know. Maybe it will against Michigan. But in the grander possible sort of scheme, this is just a team that is playing really well in all phases. I mean, even special teams, it's not really asked to do much. Probably the biggest concern there is injuries. They got 2 kickoff specialists injured now.
Yeah, their kickoffs haven't been great. But, I mean, look, when you're breaking down a game, you're like, man, our biggest problem is our kickoffs because we're kicking off 800 times a game. We're probably in a good shape. I think what speaks to we talked about this kind of briefly during the game, how far this team has come. The starting duo at wide receiver last year was the fourth quarter backups. Donovan McCulley and E.J. Williams were in on mop-up time because they couldn't get playing time in the first 3 quarters because the receivers are playing the rest of the receiving room is so deep and so talented and playing so well right now. I mean, it kind of shows you how far, what coaching, how much they coach these guys up. Most of these guys were transfers, with the exception of Omar Cooper and Addison Kobe, who've gotten some run. But, I mean, how well they've been integrated into the offense. I mean, look, that's coaching. I think that speaks to the system that, Kurtis rightly said is his. And so, I just think you see that, look, from last year to this year, guys that you thought, coming back might have some impact, can't right now crack the lineup because the rest of the receiving room is playing so well.
And then you look at other aspects of the offense. Indiana's already rushed for, I think, 5 more touchdowns this season than it did all of last season. When you talk about Indiana's pretty remarkable red zone efficiency, a lot of that is the run game, and kind of no matter who's in there. Kalen Black got a rushing touchdown today. That means that all 4 transfer running backs have scored at least 1 touchdown already this season. Indiana's only something like 55 points or 57 points away from eclipsing last season's total offensive output.
I mean, you feel like you kind of get to the point where you just kind of reel off statistics because everything's just been so impressive.
Yeah. Honestly, I think what you do is you get to
4 weeks.
You get to a point, and I think this is going to kind of bend into a little bit of what I'm writing after this. You get to a point where you feel like you should stop comparing it to what's happened before.
Yeah, because
this is something just completely different. And we talked about in the offseason, the roster is very different. Lots of new faces, obviously a heavily turned over staff, only 1 assistant retained, etc. But it's kind of hard to take anything that's happened in the previous 3 years as any frame of reference to what this team is doing. Because even when Indiana was playing teams like this, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, nobody's trying to pick on Tom Allen or anything like that. It's the natural sort of chronological whatever of Indiana football. It wasn't like this. And it certainly wasn't like this in a Big Ten road game against UCLA or any team comparable to that. Even when you would, watch Indiana play teams it was supposed to beat, a lot of the time it would beat them, but maybe 38-13 or something like that. Something where you'd feel good about it after the game, but you wouldn't look at it afterward and say, boy, the things you nitpick are that they gave up 80-something yards rushing in the first half and 2 of their kickoff specialists are hurt. Like that, those are not things, regardless of who you're playing, that have been sort of reflective of IU football in the last, again, certainly the last 3 years. In some of these numbers, you're going back 10, 15, 20, even 30 years sometimes to find the last time Indiana accomplished some of these things. Again, Kurtis is the first IU coach ever to start 4-0. And again, listen, it's going to get harder. Now, I guess the question is sort of how much harder. You just pulled up the Maryland game. They beat Villanova 38-20. Billy Edwards was really good in that game. I think that's going to be maybe the best quarterback Indiana's seen.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was just about to bring up. I just want to see what they did. That they haven't faced sort of an imposing passing offense yet. UCLA was not very impressive. Ethan Garber's, they got a ton of pressure. They impacted that. Made that an issue. But I'm interested to see how the secondary looks when they're against maybe some better athletes on the outside.
Which is something Maryland has.
Ty Felton had 14 catches for 157 yards. So, and he's probably the best receiver that they'll face this in this block of this first month. So I think that'll
D'Angelo Prather's a good player too.
Yeah, D'Angelo Pons, who was out the first half with targeting suspension. Interested to see how he matches up against a guy like Felton, see how the secondary kind of holds up. Because we talked about the challenge escalates now, and so you want to see there's some things I'm interested in seeing. Can the offense keep it up against a sort of Big Ten defensive line multiple weeks in a row, things of that nature. But I do think this first 4 weeks has built confidence that this wasn't. I don't think what we saw was an aberration. They might not score 50 points a game kind of in the next 4 weeks, but I do think that they've proven they've answered a lot of the questions that you had kind of before the season. Would the JMU guys and a lot of the transfers they had from lower levels be able to have an impact in the game? And I think the answer is basically across the board. Yeah. They had some depth questions, but you saw guys, I pointed this out in my recap, like Sam West stepping in as the backup tight end. Kalen Black's your third running back, and he was really good today. And so you kind of see them built a little bit of depth at places. I don't think there's as much sort of questions about any of their talent that those transfers. They've done really well through these 4 weeks, and I think Indiana's deserving. They got some recognition in the AP poll, the coaches poll. And I think that's only going to continue here in the next 10 days before that Maryland game, or 7 days.
I think if they beat Maryland, they'll be ranked.
They have to.
Yeah, I think if they beat Maryland, they'll be ranked. I think the last thing we should talk about is Kurtis Rourke, because it does. Even if there have been times when almost Indiana's not had to ask too much of him, this was kind of another one of those games because the ground game was working so well, the defense was playing so well. Through 4 games now at Indiana, he's over 1,000 yards of total offense if you include the run and the pass. He's got 10 total touchdowns.
Yeah, he's on pace for 3,000 yards and will be the 4th 3,000-yard passer in IU history, which is crazy.
Yeah, and he's got the highest quarterback rating of his career thus far in a single season. If you sort of subscribe to ESPN's numbers on that, again, like you talked about today, he wasn't prolific, but it was because he didn't have to be. 16 to 20. His completion percentages have been good. I think the quarterback more than anybody else in the offense is going to be pivotal to a team that's just not turning the ball over, which Indiana literally hasn't through 4 games. I don't think he took a sack today. I think Taven Jackson got sacked once. And that Rourke hasn't taken a sack.
I don't know if you saw the article. They hadn't gone 3 games without giving up a sack since 2012-2013, the first game of that season, last game of that 12 season, and the first 2 games of 13. Hadn't done it in a single season since 2001. So that's the last time they had gone 3 games without a sack. They almost did it tonight.
Yeah,
I don't think they would have if they had kept Rourke in there.
No, because again, he scrambled a little bit more today, and he basically just said, "Hey, that was what was there." So I just took it. 4 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. He kind of. I think he chuckled a little bit at like that awkward sort of way. He tried to protect himself when he got
slumbered down.
But he's not somebody that when you see him in the open field. I remember pointing out to you in the preseason, he had 11 rushing touchdowns at Iowa. When you see him get out in an open field, or Ohio, excuse me, thank you. One of those Big Ten states.
They're just beating teams they're not even playing. That's how good they are.
But in his career at Ohio, he had something like 700 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns. So it's not like he
can
can't
move. No, he
do
can
it.
move.
He is not a statue passer that every once in a while you think like, oh boy, here he goes. It's more just kind of, and I even asked him about this after the game. I said, just kind of how important is it in your mind to just put that on film so that like the next defensive coordinator says, we can't just leave the middle of the field wide open with no contain because he can run for 9 yards and a first down or whatever. Well, he's just been, so much of Indiana's start has been built around this offense, how many points they're scoring, how efficiently they're doing it. They were coming into today anyway, the best 4th down team or 3rd down team in the Big Ten. They are the most prolific red zone team in the Big Ten. They have not committed a turnover. They're averaging more than 50 points per game. And if there's one person that like is at the center of that the most, it's Kurtis.
2 things that stood out about Rourke's day: 4 or 5 on passes of 15 yards plus. And
he had some really pretty
the two balls to Miles Price were basically like he had a turn and it was just like in his hands.
Yeah.
And Price said like, look, that's pretty easy football, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, it was like that's easy. So those throws, you put that on film when you only complete 16 passes and 4 of them are for 15 plus yards. Dangerous offense down the field. Second thing was the play. Kurt Signetti's talked a lot about his veteran savvy, his experience, and what that brings. The play in the red zone, third down, nothing zone. Actually good coverage for one of the few times in the day.
Yeah.
He extends the play, kind of looking, just rolling out to his right, sees clear pass interference on Zach Horton, throws the ball at him, and because the official's going to have to call it, draws the penalty, fresh set it down, touchdown the next snap.
Yeah.
That's a veteran quarterback.
And that's little stuff that like you don't.
It does not get show up on the box score.
And you don't even necessarily see it it doesn't occur to you necessarily. It didn't occur to me until you pointed it out.
Yeah.
Like that he was looking for the pass interference penalty, but it is
and he also had to extend that play to make that happen because he could have thrown it away earlier, but he keeps his eyes downfield, and I think Kurt mentioned that earlier in the week that's kind of been one of the more impressive things he saw. That was kind of the key to the third down success last week. Again today they had third down success when he was in, just because he's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. He's keeping his eyes downfield, trying to make things happen, but doesn't force the ball at the same time. And that was kind of a moment that stuck out to me. That look, wasn't a great. It wasn't something that you'll talk about maybe Monday, but it's just those moments stack up, and I think are going to matter when you face the Marylands, Nebraskas of the world. When Nebraska got a freshman quarterback, you have a veteran quarterback that's been in these moments, and I think those things will matter down the line.
Indiana's 4-0, 1-0 in the Big Ten. The last thing, or the question you just have for the next 7 days is, what does the crowd look like against Maryland?
That was just he didn't mention the crowd today, but the second half again,
it cleared out.
There was about 10 fans in the
to be fair, like it was roasting hot today, and it was.
You are so kind.
I think the crowd stuck around until they got the first.
Who has seen the crowds and knows
I've been telling people,
but no, you're giving them excuses. There's no Kurt Signetti's standard doesn't change whether it's 150 degrees.
The question is whether I'm gonna be a little worried if it's 150 degrees.
I was in Vegas this summer and it reached 122. So I mean, it got.
We're going there. That's what you're saying.
No, we should next year with the Bull for Las Vegas.
Was anyone watching a football game outside when you were in Vegas? The question I think is, what will the crowd look like? What will the atmosphere be? Obviously, how will Indiana play to it? Like, in a way, I almost wonder if there would be more value in Maryland being difficult, the place being full, everybody sticking around and winning, than just another, 40-11 win, in the sense that there would be almost kind of I think the crowd needs to understand what it can do for.
Well, yeah, because, you saw the third downs. It's like they do the get up on third down, and it's like one guy wearing a flag. It's not the most imposing atmosphere. I'm not going to look. I mean, they've done enough now where I think you can buy in a little bit. I think
you buy in a lot, frankly.
But I'm saying
from a bowl game with 8
but I'm saying,
games
if fans were sort of we've been through this before, I think you can buy in. And you better do it quick because these jobs are going to open up. You never know what happens.
Right? Well, we're not going to start the speculation today.
No,
he's Mike Nisley.
I'm teasing.
I'm Zach Oster.
We didn't get any questions. Next time we need.
Somebody did call us the best beat writer duo in college football.
I wasn't going to point that.
That was nice. Well, I wasn't going to point
out.
There's
11 people here. Type us a question.
No. We're going to.
No.
You got to walk before you can run. This has been Mind Your Banners.
What they didn't see was that you taking 25 minutes to get this set up.
It was like 10 minutes. I had to change a password.
That's keeping time.
He's Mike Nisley. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Banners postgame for Indiana 52, Charlotte 14. We'll be back sometime midweek with the customary podcast as we do. We'll probably talk a little bit, I think, about basketball media day. We really haven't touched on that yet, but it's probably worth talking a little bit about that as well. But a big build-up, obviously, to the Maryland game. Until then, for the Indianapolis Star, moving at all times, thanks so much for watching, listening, however you consume this. We will talk to you soon.